my internal identity was entirely connected to my athletic abilities. But then when I graduated college, how do I live in this world without a way to communicate who I am on the field? If willpower were enough, this athlete has enough willpower to run through any cinder block wall that you put in front of me. I did it time and time again. Dare me. This is not about willpower. It's not about morality. I was incapable of living in a world, but when I had a drink, suddenly I could talk.
This is Melissa. From a very young age, Melissa had an insatiable drive to reach the pinnacle of athletic success. A local lacrosse star in high school, she was offered scholarships to some of the top educational institutions in America. One of those offers came from the University of North Carolina. One day, her recruiter asked what it was going to take to get her to come to Carolina. Melissa said she wanted the number 23, because if she was going to Carolina, she wanted to be the Michael Jordan of lacrosse. Striving for greatness was an indelible part of her daily mantra. Following college, Melissa earned a position with the NBA in New York City. That is when everything changed. The moment she no longer identified as an athlete and struggled to find who she was in this world. Fast forward to today, Melissa holds an executive position in the addiction treatment space. The journey from then to now starts here. I present to you Melissa's story. Last night we were talking and you said the phrase, addiction does not discriminate. Talk to me about that and how it relates to your upbringing.
You know, I grew up in a two-parent household. I was and still am, quite frankly, afforded all of the opportunity in the world. I had a college education. My dad never missed a game that I played in, and yet I still found myself in a place that, if you looked at me today, people probably wouldn't believe. There were these propensities in my family history to mental illness and to alcoholism in particular. So my father's father, his name is Gene. Gene, we never called him Grandpa. I have very few memories of Gene, and as I got older, I understood that Gene drank a lot. And Gene was not allowed to be around his grandkids unless he could be sober, and he couldn't be sober for very long. My dad can have a margarita and be done, or he can drink a half of a beer. That has never, ever once been my experience. If I crack open a bottle of vodka, I drink the whole thing. It was clear that I had some gifts that maybe other kids my age didn't have. It was a way that I could communicate effectively with my father when in other situations I couldn't.
It almost sounds like the lacrosse for you, it was a way to gain acceptance and feel like you were good enough. Once you couldn't communicate to your father that way, and once you didn't have something that other people looked at you for and said, wow, she's good at this, you turned to something else.
That's precisely what happened. I learned early on that I could connect with my dad and I could spend quality time with him and communicate effectively. And I was good, so it felt good, right? Like, who doesn't like an athlete? So I was getting attention from newspapers and magazines, but that became who I was. I was defined by my ability. I go to college, same thing. It gave me something to talk about with humans where I had something of value to add to the room. When that wasn't around, I did not literally know how to communicate with people. I didn't know how to start a conversation. I didn't know how to contribute meaningfully in a group of people. I didn't even really know how to meet people except to go to a bar, which is where I ultimately found myself in New York City. I was longing for human connection, I just didn't know how to do it. My dad played soccer at the University of Maryland, coached at Milford Mill and Woodlawn High School. I mean, that just goes to show you, everything in our family revolves around athletics. The way that we communicate is through sports almost exclusively. Up until recently, we used to get calls to our house on Christmas Day from his players, like thanking him for like saving their lives. It's crazy. So I moved to New York, and I actually was living with a former teammate of mine from the University of North Carolina. I noticed for sure that my hanging out at PJ Leahy's was not normal, right? Like, I started to meet people who were doing, like, who goes to the bar, like who has a functional life that's at the bar every night until 4 o'clock in the morning. Like eventually, like you find yourself, or I found myself hanging out with people who made it acceptable to be behaving that way. There was a guy named Vernon who looked after me. One time we were at this Irish, like truly fresh off the boat Irish bar, where everybody in there literally had just come from Ireland. And Vernon was known as somebody that was successful in the United States. So he was the guy that when somebody was sent from Ireland over, they were to go to see him to get a job, because he's very, he's connected to the mob, right? And so I remember going to the bathroom, and I'm like squatting over the toilet, and there's a rock glass that comes over the bathroom stall, and it lands on I could show you the scar, right? It shatters on my knee, and it splits the whole thing open. But I'm hammered, okay? All I know is there's blood everywhere. So we get in the car, in a cab, and we go to Jamaica, Queens, to the nearest hospital, and Vernon whips out a wad of cash, and is like, we don't have insurance, even though I did, but we couldn't be on paper, right? And there couldn't be any police reports. So I'm pulled up on a gurney, and they take just a staple gun and boom, 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 boom. They close up the wound and we're out. And he just left the money and that was it. Like, this was normal. One time I came home for a dress fitting for my oldest brother's wedding.
You were coming back from Maryland, and you got right off the train from Maryland with your luggage and went straight to the bar.
Yeah, but that happened all the time. But this one time in particular, I got jumped. And I was beaten pretty badly. It was a normal thought, like just to get some spoons and put them in the freezer and take them to work the next morning and tell a story about how I got hit with a lacrosse ball. Walking around like I'm a boxer, right? With a frozen spoon on my eye. And then meanwhile, I'm escorting, Mark Hurd, the CEO of Hewlett-Packard at the time, into the office with his security team and the Crown Princes of Abu Dhabi and, Qatar, and negotiating naming rights for the Beijing Olympic basketball arena, and dealing with Sheldon Adelson, the chairman of the LVCVA, and it's crazy. I was walking into the office literally like a wounded soldier every day. It's surprising that nobody actually asked me what was happening. Maybe if somebody had said, are you okay? At some point, my nighttime antics crossed into my daytime life. And it happened for me one morning where I could not go to work. My anxiety was so paralyzing. I called my mom and I said, you have to come here. I can't get out of bed. She showed up at my apartment, and I can't even imagine what went through her mind, but it was probably like, oh my God. Because it was just disgusting. And many stories, if I went home and I could be with my family, maybe all of this stuff would just take care of itself and I could go back to work, But that didn't happen. Because wherever I go with me. And so I went with me back to Maryland.
Continuing on the timeline, you've been home for 9 months now. You got your real estate license.
I got my real estate license. I started working for, a company in real estate, but that was never gonna happen. I couldn't show up anywhere. I literally was drinking all the time at this point. I'm working at a couple of bars because it's acceptable and I can earn cash, whatever. On Sundays, I worked at this place called Cancun Cantina. I was cut off, right, because I was too loaded to be working. I don't know what transpired after that, because I was literally blackout, but I totaled my 4Runner somewhere near Pennsylvania.
So you had an interaction
with the police.
You don't remember it at all
No,
to this day?
Not at all. At this point, all of our family interactions were like, how's Melissa today, I didn't show up at Thanksgiving dinner, and my parents put out a missing persons report. And the cops show up, right, at this drug dealer's house with my parents. I was so angry that my two worlds had just collided. Like, meanwhile, my parents, like, actually, they think I'm dead, you know? I didn't want them to see me like that. I didn't want them to be so, because if they had seen me, right, then it became real. Like, I could have just gotten in the car, right, and with them and gone 3 miles down the road to a Thanksgiving leftover plate, right, and a bed. But, like, I couldn't face the fact that, like, I was causing harm beyond just to myself. I'd uprooted the entirety of the family, you know, and it's bad, you know you're just f***ed up when the drug dealer's like, you need to, what is wrong with you? You don't need to be here. You need to go home with your parents. This is like the people who don't have another environment to go to, like when they're telling you, like, you have an opportunity to be someplace else, go take advantage of it, right? And it wasn't too many days after that that my dad shows up with a Verizon bag and a box of bagels, and I'm pissed. So I go and I sit in his truck with him, right? I got you a new phone because I know that you've ditched your, you know, the phone that you had before. And, you know, your mom can't sleep, you know, because she thinks you're dead, you know. So I got you a phone, if you can just do me a favor and text her. We realize now that, like, we can't save you, but you have a phone now, so when you're ready, like, just call, you know? And we'll come and get you. And so it was like 48 hours later that I called him, and he came and got me. And I went to treatment. I don't know why, but I knew at that point that I was safe. That, like, I was no longer a disappointment, but rather I was sick. That's all I needed. Was, like, for somebody to communicate to me that I didn't have to say anything. You know, because I couldn't describe, like, what I was feeling, and I couldn't describe why I was hurting, and I couldn't describe, like, why the circumstances of my life looked the way that they did. I just needed to know that it was okay. And that's what he did. He gave me a place to, like, I didn't have to use my words. It was like, in that car, we were on the lacrosse field, like, you know. So, you know, we'd get to treatment. They're like, well, you're pregnant. And for me, there was never a question in my mind as to whether or not I was going to have the baby. For me, I knew that this baby was put into my life to probably help me find sober. Now I got to call my dad again. This poor dude, right, just dropped me off at a mental institution, like his, you know, all-American athlete. And this is not necessarily what my dad is thinking of me, but this is what's going through my mind. This is still, like, my internal struggle is, like, what I believe I am in my father's eyes doesn't have anything to do with what he might actually feel about me. And I remember it feeling like an entire day of silence went by between me saying, I have to tell you something, and him saying, okay. And I said, I'm pregnant. And then it's quiet again. And in my mind, I know that I played 1,000 things through as to what his response would be. He said, well, congratulations. In case you didn't know, God has bigger plans for you. That was it. It turns out, in case I needed any further reassurance, like, there's not by accident that I ended up in treatment on that day. It was 2 weeks gestation, which was just but a couple hours before, like, the egg implants into the uterine wall, which is when the, you know, when that thing starts to feed off of what's going into the body. So I was gonna do whatever was recommended to me to stay sober through the pregnancy, because I did not want to harm the baby. Was not necessarily fully committed to being sober the rest of my life. So I'd planned a bottle of vodka and an 8-ball of cocaine the day after I delivered. I delivered this baby, and I really can't even describe it. I was just so enamored with her. Like, the thought of having a drink or a drug did not cross my mind. Never came to mind. Treatment doesn't keep me sober. doesn't get me sober. It just gives me space between my last drink and potentially my next, so that I might have an experience in between where there is some sort of higher level intervention. The police don't do it for me. Getting arrested doesn't do it for me. Totaling my car doesn't do it for me. The look on my parents' face doesn't do it for me. My self-will is no solution. My best solution was a bottle of vodka, and look where it got me.
When we were first talking about doing this, I was asking you how much you were willing to share, and you said, I don't care, I'm an open book, I'll tell you anything. You hold a prominent position, your face is out there, people know who you are, particularly in the industry that we're in. And the thought of potential repercussions of this being out there, I don't think it ever crossed your mind. One of the answers you gave for that was really interesting to me, which was something to the degree of, if you don't share this with other people, you're not going to have an impact on others.
By not sharing my experience with my dad, there was a good chance that there were several other females that were listening to me that weren't going to tell their dads because they were too afraid of what their response would have been. And if there's one unborn child that comes to term because a little girl is not afraid to tell her dad, then that's worth it. Or if a dad has an experience where they can look at me and see that it's not the end of life to have a baby out of wedlock, because what that little girl has to share with the world is far more impactful than what his personal feelings of the world's perception of him as a father are, then that's what it's meant to do. The words come to my mouth when I'm meant to share my personal experience. And my personal experience is really all I have to share with somebody else to offer them a little bit of hope. You know, the same competitiveness that I have on the lacrosse field is now used for a different thing. There's a national championship that just never gets played. I'm constantly looking for it, right? And the little victories are found in somebody that you find that their face is a little less jaundice, or they have some brightness that comes back into their eyeball. Like literally, like when you can see someone who finds a little bit of hope, you can see it in their physical person. And I'm not responsible for the results, and I can't force anybody to do the same kind of work that I did, but I can open up a door that they can choose to walk through. I can bring them to it, but I can't make them do it.
So Fallon, I think all the tens of millions of viewers who are going to watch this video are going to wonder what happened to your foot.
I fell down the steps.
You fell down the steps.
Tens of millions?
That one right here? Kind of like me. Unique, with a little bit of mold, but still beautiful.
Hey, you were in there for an awful long time.
Because I can't touch anything.
Poop happens, Melissa. Poophappens.com.
That's a pretty good name.
Right?
Poophappens.com.
All right. Well, that's going to be the start of the documentary.
Okay. That's actually a really good beginning.